Welcome back to Stoic Station. Slow down for a moment, because if losing you felt final, confusing, even quietly humiliating, there's a truth you were never told clearly enough. You weren't wrong, you were early. Rare things are almost never recognized while we're still standing inside them. They're only noticed after silence hits, after comfort disappears, after life turns the lights up and starts asking questions ego can't answer. And that's what this video is about. Not hope, not waiting, not trying to pull anyone back. Today, you're going to understand why people don't actually escape when they leave, how life quietly circles them back to the lesson they tried to outrun, and why your absence doesn't weaken your position. It clarifies it. If you've been blaming yourself for staying steady, for being patient, for offering peace instead of chaos, this will reset how you see the entire story. You'll see why what felt too quiet was never empty. It was depth. Before we go further, check in with yourself honestly. Drop 1 if part of you is still hoping silence will pull them back. Drop 2 if you're choosing silence as self-respect, not a signal. There's no right answer, but knowing where you stand changes everything. If this already feels uncomfortably accurate, like the video and subscribe to Stoic Station. Start this journey now, not later, not when it makes sense, but now. Because in the next chapter, you'll see why what looked like an ending was actually a release. They didn't escape. Life is already circling them back. And brother, you're not standing where they left you anymore. Let's dive in. 1. They didn't leave growth. They left depth. Most people don't walk away because something is broken. They walk away because something feels too quiet to impress their ego. That's the part almost no one wants to admit. When someone leaves you, it feels final. Like a door didn't just close but erased the meaning of everything you were building together. One moment, there was direction. The next, there was silence. And in that silence, you start questioning yourself. How did consistency become disposable overnight? How did showing up every day turn into something that could be replaced so easily? That kind of ending doesn't just hurt. It disorients. It makes you wonder if what you offered was ever enough in the first place. But here's what actually happened. You showed up when it mattered. Not just when it was convenient. Not just when things were exciting. You stayed steady when things weren't easy. You didn't perform love or sell potential. You provided structure, presence, and reliability. You were the person who held the emotional center when life became unpredictable. And still, they walked away as if leaving meant progress, as if stepping out of something solid automatically meant stepping into something better. That's where the misunderstanding begins. They didn't leave because life suddenly opened a better door. They left because they misread what depth actually looks like. They confused familiarity with boredom. They mistook stability for weakness. They labeled peace as stagnation. And when someone believes that growth must always feel exciting, anything grounded starts to feel small. Calm doesn't stimulate the ego. Consistency doesn't create adrenaline. Depth doesn't announce itself loudly. So, to an untrained eye, it can look like nothing is happening, even when everything important is being built underneath. But life doesn't reward speed. It tests sustainability. You can run from depth for a while. You can chase novelty, attention, movement, and constant stimulation. You can convince yourself that forward motion always equals growth, but eventually life circles you back to what you avoided. Not dramatically, not with punishment, quietly, through contrast, through comparison, through the slow realization that what felt too quiet was actually doing the most work. This is the part most people miss. What they called moving on wasn't evolution, it was delay. Life doesn't erase value just because someone walks away from it. It preserves it. And then, when the distractions wear thin, it reintroduces that value through absence and consequence, through moments where something feels off but they can't name why, through connections that look good on the surface but don't hold under pressure, through the unsettling awareness that calm is harder to find than they expected, That's when the lesson they skipped begins to reopen. Because depth isn't loud. It doesn't beg to be recognized. It doesn't demand applause. It simply holds. And holding doesn't feel impressive until it's gone. Only then does the contrast sharpen. Only then do they realize that what they walked away from wasn't ordinary. It was foundational. This is where your role ends. You don't need to chase, explain, or justify what you offered. You don't need to remind anyone of your value. Your steadiness already did the work. Your presence created a baseline they didn't recognize until it was removed. And now, life is doing what it always does when someone mistakes silence for emptiness. It's bringing the lesson back around, this time without you there to soften the impact. They didn't leave depth behind because it wasn't valuable. They left because they weren't ready to carry it. And life has a way of reopening lessons that were skipped, especially the ones tied to stability, patience, and emotional maturity. So if you're sitting there wondering how something so solid could be left behind, understand this clearly. What feels too quiet at first is often the most irreplaceable thing later. And when that realization finally lands, it doesn't arrive with excitement. It arrives with humility. Hold on to that perspective as we move forward. Because once depth is recognized through absence, the next shift is inevitable. The moment they realize they didn't outgrow you, they simply stepped away from something they didn't yet understand. 2. Freedom felt right, until calm disappeared. Rejection feels final to the one left behind, but to the one who leaves, it feels like freedom. That difference alone explains so much of the confusion you were left carrying. When they walked away, it wasn't framed as loss in their mind. It was framed as relief, as release, as choosing themselves. And somehow, in that framing, you were made to feel like choosing you meant settling, like staying required sacrifice, like commitment to something steady was a limitation rather than a strength. That cuts deep when you know how much you gave without keeping score. It cuts deeper when you realize you were never asking for more, only for presence, consistency, and mutual care. At first, everything seemed to confirm their decision. New attention arrived easily, new conversations sparked curiosity, new excitement replaced routine. From the outside, it looked like momentum, like proof. Like evidence they made the right call, and from where you stood, it looked like you were left behind while they moved forward effortlessly, lighter and unburdened. That image alone can make even the strongest person question their worth. But freedom only feels good when nothing tests it. Reality doesn't challenge illusions immediately. It adjusts the lighting slowly, quietly. At first, nothing is obviously wrong. The smiles are still there. The activity continues, but something subtle begins to shift beneath the surface. Conversations stay shallow longer than expected. Interest doesn't deepen into presence. Attention doesn't translate into safety. The energy that once felt exciting begins to feel thin, not dramatic, just insufficient. And then pressure shows up. Life always brings pressure eventually. Stress, uncertainty, emotional weight. That's when most connections reveal what they're actually made of. Because excitement can attract, but it can't regulate. Novelty can distract, but it can't stabilize. When tension enters the room, surface-level bonds collapse quickly. The jokes stop landing. The patience runs out. The reassurance that once seemed automatic suddenly has conditions attached. That's when the discomfort starts to register. They begin realizing something they weren't prepared to face. Not everyone can create emotional safety. Not everyone can stay grounded when things aren't easy. Not everyone knows how to remain present without escalating, withdrawing, or making the moment about themselves. Most people know how to entertain. Very few know how to hold space. And holding space doesn't feel exciting until you're in a moment that desperately needs it. This is where the misunderstanding becomes clear. Stimulation isn't the same as stability. Intensity isn't the same as meaning. And attention, no matter how abundant, doesn't replace the calm that comes from being emotionally understood. What you offered didn't spike adrenaline. It didn't create highs and lows. It didn't keep the nervous system on edge. It did something far more valuable. It regulated, it grounded, it made the world feel manageable. But calm is invisible to people who equate feeling alive with feeling activated. So they mistook peace for boredom. They mislabeled consistency as predictability. They assumed steadiness meant lack of passion. And because your presence didn't demand effort to maintain, they underestimated the cost of losing it. Only after it's gone does its absence become noticeable. Only when the emotional environment shifts does the contrast sharpen. This is when quiet comparison begins, not consciously at first, not maliciously. Just a subtle internal question they can't turn off. Why doesn't this feel as steady? Why do misunderstandings escalate so quickly? Why does reassurance feel conditional now? Why does calm feel harder to find? Those questions don't appear because they miss you yet. They appear because freedom stopped feeling free once it was tested. And here's the part you need to understand clearly. They didn't leave because you lacked value. They left because they lacked the depth to maintain it. Being with you required presence, emotional regulation, and maturity. And when someone isn't ready for that level of connection, they don't say, "I'm not ready." They say, "I need space." They call it freedom. They convince themselves they're choosing growth, when in reality, they're avoiding responsibility for something meaningful. This isn't about blame, it's about clarity. What they walked away from wasn't heavy, it was grounding. And grounding doesn't feel impressive until instability replaces it. When calm disappears, the nervous system notices before the mind does. Restlessness creeps in. Emotional safety becomes inconsistent, and slowly, quietly, the comparison you never initiated begins to work on its own. You don't need to remind them of what you offered. You don't need to compete with what's new. Life is already doing that work. Every shallow interaction, every moment of unnecessary tension, every time excitement fails to translate into security adds another layer of awareness. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable over time. And when calm disappears, that's when the real comparison quietly begins. Because once someone experiences the difference between stimulation and stability, between attention and safety, between noise and peace, they can't unlearn it. They may resist it, they may delay it, but they can't erase it. Freedom stops being a thrill when it no longer provides rest. And that's when the truth they avoided starts knocking again, softly at first, then with increasing clarity. Hold on to that understanding as we move forward, because once freedom loses its shine and calm becomes the missing piece, the next shift is inevitable. And it always leads back to the question they didn't know how to answer when they left. What actually sustains me when life gets real? 3. Silence didn't erase you. It exposed your value. If silence truly erased people, you wouldn't still feel them circling long after contact ended. That's the first clue most men miss. You stepped back. You went quiet. You did exactly what everyone says to do when something ends. And yet, instead of disappearing, you remained present in a way that didn't make sense. No messages, no reactions, no explanations. Still, something lingered. That confusion makes you question whether silence even works, or whether it was all just another story people tell to cope with loss. Here's what actually happened. You weren't loud. You weren't dramatic. You didn't dominate conversations or demand reassurance to feel secure. You regulated tension without trying to control it. When emotions rose, your presence slowed the room down. You listened without rushing to fix. You stayed grounded when things got heavy, and because you made that steadiness look natural, no one noticed the work it was doing until it was gone. This is where most people misunderstand detachment. They think it's a decision, a boundary you announce, a switch you flip. But detachment isn't logical. It's physiological. It's stored in the body, not in arguments or intentions. Emotional bonds don't dissolve on command because they aren't created by willpower. They're formed through repetition, consistency, and a nervous system learning what safe feels like over time. So when you left, they didn't miss you in the way movies portray. There was no immediate longing, no dramatic collapse. What they lost first was regulation, a tightness in the chest that didn't have a clear reason, restlessness at night, a low-grade anxiety that couldn't be traced back to any single event. Not nostalgia, withdrawal. That distinction matters. Real connection wires safety into the nervous system. Consistent care creates associations tied to calm, trust, and emotional grounding. Over time, the body learns this state as equilibrium. And once that wiring exists, it doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. The mind can rationalize absence. The body can't forget balance. That's why silence didn't erase you. It removed the structure you were quietly providing. You weren't just a person in their life. You were an emotional environment, a baseline, a reference point their nervous system used to measure what okay felt like. And when that environment disappeared, the contrast became unavoidable. This is why they surface indirectly. A random check-in, a name dropped through mutual connections, a subtle awareness you can feel even when no words are exchanged. It isn't manipulation, it isn't strategy. It's the body searching for a familiar state of regulation in the absence of something that once stabilized it. They don't think of you because they want to. They think of you because their system remembers equilibrium. And here's the part that shifts everything for you. Your power was never in their thoughts. Thoughts can be distracted, redirected, suppressed. Your power was in your absence, in what stopped happening when you stopped being available, in the calm that vanished without explanation, in the way tension now escalates faster, in how misunderstandings feel heavier without someone quietly holding the emotional center. Silence didn't punish them. It clarified reality. When you were present, your steadiness blended into the background. It felt automatic, expected, part of the environment. And because it didn't announce itself, it went unmeasured. Absence changed that. It concentrated your value instead of diluting it. It stripped away noise and revealed contrast, not through words, but through lived experience. This is why trying to be remembered always backfires. Reminders invite resistance, explanations invite debate, silence invites reflection, and reflection is where truth does its work without your involvement. You don't need to stay available to remain significant. You don't need to provoke a response to prove impact. The imprint you left operates quietly, independently of your actions now. Every time instability shows up elsewhere, comparison activates. Every time they feel unseen, the contrast sharpens. Every time calm is needed and not found, the absence tightens. That doesn't mean you're meant to wait. It means you're meant to understand what already happened. You mattered in a way that doesn't scream for attention. You mattered in a way that resists erasure. And that kind of value isn't something to exploit. It's something to outgrow. Because while their nervous system keeps reaching backward, yours is learning how to move forward without needing to be remembered. That's the Stoic shift. You don't attach your worth to their awareness. You don't interpret echoes as invitations. You recognize them for what they are, a system recalibrating after losing stability. And recalibration is always uncomfortable for the one who depended on what they didn't recognize. So if you've been sensing that quiet pull, not longing, not obsession, just a subtle awareness, don't mistake it for a sign to go back. It's simply proof that silence didn't erase you. It removed the noise that hid your value. And once value is exposed through absence, it can't be unseen. Hold on to that as we move forward, because when silence reveals worth instead of erasing it, the next phase isn't about memory, it's about comparison. And comparison is where realization deepens in ways no explanation ever could. 4. Comparison starts where presence ends. Every new person after you enters a competition they never agreed to and can't win. That line may sound harsh, but it explains a quiet reality most people never say out loud. When they left, they genuinely believed depth was replaceable. They assumed emotional maturity came standard, that anyone given enough time or interest could offer what you did. From their perspective, nothing about what you brought felt rare, because it was always there. Consistent, calm, available. And when something feels constant, the mind stops measuring it. That assumption is what set everything in motion. At first, novelty did exactly what novelty is supposed to do. New energy distracted them. New conversations created momentum. New attention felt validating. Everything seemed lighter because nothing yet required effort. There was no pressure to regulate emotions, no need to navigate conflict with care, no expectation to hold space when things became uncomfortable. From the outside, it looked like progress. From the inside, it felt easy. But ease only exists before responsibility arrives. Then pressure showed up. It always does. Stress, misunderstandings, real-life tension that can't be smoothed over with charm or chemistry. And pressure has a way of stripping illusions quickly. When things stop being fun and start being real, the nervous system takes over. That's when the comparison begins. Not consciously, not maliciously, but automatically. They don't sit down and compare resumes. They don't list qualities or replay highlight reels. The brain asks quieter questions. How do they handle tension? Do they escalate or regulate? Do they listen or do they defend? Can they stay present without making every difficult moment about themselves? These questions aren't strategic. They're instinctive. They emerge the moment emotional safety is tested. This is where your absence starts doing its work. When the new person reacts impulsively, your calm resurfaces in memory. When conversations break down under pressure, your emotional intelligence becomes more visible in hindsight. When reassurance feels conditional or inconsistent, the nervous system remembers how grounded it once felt without effort. Not because you were perfect, but because you were steady. You didn't spike emotions, you settled them. And that contrast is impossible to ignore. They begin noticing how quickly chaos replaces calm, how misunderstandings escalate instead of resolving, how attention disappears the moment things get heavy. The excitement that once felt liberating now feels unstable, and slowly, without you saying a word, the internal comparison sharpens. Not because they want to compare, but because the body does it for them. This is the part most people don't understand about replacement. You don't replace depth with novelty. You postpone the realization that depth was doing something novelty can't. You don't replace emotional safety with attraction. You delay the moment when safety becomes necessary. And when that moment arrives, the nervous system looks for familiar patterns. That's when you stop being a memory and become a standard. Standards aren't loud, they don't announce themselves, they reveal themselves through absence, through the quiet realization that something once felt easier, steadier, more grounded. Through the subtle discomfort of realizing that what you dismissed as ordinary was actually rare. The mind may resist that conclusion, but the body recognizes it immediately, and once standards are established, they don't reset. This is why comparison never works in their favor. Every new connection is measured against an internal reference point they didn't know they were creating while they were with you. Every shortcoming adds another layer to a conclusion they don't want to face.